Deep breath. This is where we get our outtakes, right?
Always. I'm scared of what Erin's finally going to do to us.
Heck, you can even see my laundry I've been trying to iron hanging in my doorway today. Okay. Well,
speaking of TikToks, I know. Here you go, Erin.
Okay. Focus. All right. I got it.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
Season 13 has begun. In this season, Chris and I will be covering a variety of topics. Topics that you might hear addressed quickly in your morning meeting, or topics that might be more fully addressed in a staff meeting. Topics like sharp safety, preference cards, tourniquet safety, expiration dates, wellness, and we are even going to throw in some yoga in episode 8. So there really is something for everyone in this season, and we're starting it with the fundamentals this week, and we are going to be talking about the importance really of communication and just laying a solid foundation and understanding why we do things. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back with the season 13 premiere of First Case.
Hi, I'm Chris Blevins.
And I'm Melanie Perry.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Welcome to season 13 of First Case. In this season, we are going to huddle up and talk about those things that you might or might not have heard in your daily huddle, your morning meeting, or even your weekly staff meetings. But our take on the topics will hopefully be engaging enough to keep you awake and ready to learn. I have seen more than one team member dozing off in some of our morning staff meetings, not to call anybody out, but I've seen it happen a time or two. And we definitely want you to stay awake, and we want you to learn during this season. So for our first huddle, Chris is going to be our educator, and she's going to teach us how she teaches her students to open sterile supplies and follow sterile technique. And then we're going to circle back around to the whole purpose of the huddle in the first place and why we even have one. But first, Chris, why don't you take it away?
Hi. Good morning.
Hi.
Good afternoon. No, the huddle is so important. My goodness, I can't tell you how we stress it to our students. And I think those of us who are kind of veterans in the OR, we take these things for granted, don't we?
Yeah.
So it's a moment where we can refocus. And, we talk a lot about getting ourselves out of the day-to-day rigor and, the people who may have upset you on I-40 in Tennessee, the 18-wheeler that got in your way,
exactly.
The husband who did whatever, the kids who didn't get their lunchbox, whatever. But it's a way for us to kind of get out of our own selves and focus on really what we're there for. And that's the patient. But I can tell you as an educator for X number of years now, all of that training starts in the classroom. Yeah. And if we don't teach them from day one how important those moments are, it's all going to be lost and they're going to make those bad habits. And so that's kind of where we start. And in the classroom, I'm sure you remember from your days, we have to get creative when we want them to memorize these ideas, to really understand the process and to get it perfect. We have funny ways of remembering instrumentation.
Yeah. We have funny ways of remembering lots of things, but we also have dark and twisted senses of humor. So yeah. I think that kind of plays into this just a little bit. So, absolutely. And that's, a perfect segue for how I teach my students how to open sterile supplies, right? So I don't know about you, but the acronym S.I.D.S,
was something that my mentor taught me a whole lot of years ago. And I'm going to take this moment in this audience to do a huge shout out to Cindy Mask out of Fort Worth, Texas. She was the one who got me into this hot mess to begin with. So apologies or congratulations, depends on which way you're at. She's going to retire this year, by the way.
That's exciting. How many years has she been in the operating room?
30 something.
Wow.
Yeah, she's amazing. But she's the one who first taught me the acronym. And I'm sure the look that you all are going to have on your faces, which I wish we could see in the beautiful podcast land, is S.I.D.S. Now, Melanie, when I say S.I.D.S, what do you immediately think of?
Sudden infant death syndrome, because, I wrote a paper on that in nursing school, and then we get that one drilled into our heads. So S.I.D.S does not, I don't think sterile supplies when I think S.I.D.S.
Oh, man. Well, I'm about to change you today.
Oh, boy.
So, obviously, S.I.D.S is a horrible, awful thing that can happen to neonates. But in the world of surgical technology education, S.I.D.S stands for Seal, Indicator, Date, Strikethrough.
Okay, lots more positive than sudden infant death syndrome.
Absolutely.
I'm liking this twist. Okay, let's keep going.
Okay,
right,
all right. So everybody in podcast land, absolutely, right? Take a deep breath. Yeah. I'm not trying to talk about dead babies in our lab, so we're okay.
Yeah,
but it's a great way for our students to remember the steps that are critically important, because if we don't start out with perfectly sterile supplies, just like in sterile processing, that incredibly important department that no one talks about enough, right?
Oh, yeah.
If everything we start with isn't perfectly sterile, then all the technique in the world doesn't mean anything, right? So let's go through it. The first thing is the seal. So whether it's a casket, whether it's wrapped instrumentation, whether it is supplies that are being reused or those that come from a manufacturer, if the package that it comes into isn't perfectly sealed, if there are holes or rips, it doesn't matter, right? When in doubt, throw it out.
Well, this also applies to peel-packed instruments, too. If that seal is crinkled, or if it's bubbled, or if it's got like a lump or something in it and it's not completely flat and sealed, you technically should not be using that instrument. Is that correct?
Definitely. Absolutely. And, these things can sit on shelves for months. They can be smushed, right? They can be carried in whatever it is that we're carrying them. Oh my gosh, I've seen laundry baskets carrying instruments into different operating rooms, outside the perfect case cart, but, we get creative. So you absolutely have to check the seal and make sure that that's perfectly intact. The other thing is indicator. So, oh my goodness, throughout the plethora of supplies and instrumentations that we use, we also have many different ways that we sterilize them. And so there has to be some form of indication that it has been through the sterilization process. So, that could be a color that has changed from a gold to a dark brown, from, a light brown to a black. It could have the word sterile. Wouldn't that be nice if everything
that would
just
be
said
fantastic
sterile?
If it just said sterile, because there's so many different colors that change to so many other colors. And I'm constantly sitting here looking at the indicator going, are we good? Are we not good? I don't know, because depending on who your supplier is, what you used to be used to for the right color is now the non-sterile color, and we're going to a different color for sterile. And so that backs up to communication when those things change, because holy smokes, that can be confusing. But that checking that indicator, and it's not just the outside wrap either. It's once we open it, we keep looking, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we have internal indicators, especially in our instrumentation pans, that we have to check those as well. So making sure that there are eyes on, and not just eyes, but also like, do you even know what you're looking for? Mm-hmm. And being able to verbalize that, that's incredibly important. I have a funny story actually on indicators. Tell. So do you know in all these, I think I'm starting my 10th year. I can't even remember at this point teaching. One year I had a student that constantly kept screwing up like colors. Come to find out, he's colorblind.
Oh no! Did he not know he was colorblind?
He didn't know he was colorblind.
What a terrible way to find out!
Right? Which is a dude for you, right? Yeah. I mean, a woman would know immediately.
Oh yeah, because she wouldn't want her clothes to match. But
thank you. Yeah,
exactly.
But for this particular student, no clue he was colorblind.
Oh my
Absolutely.
Gosh! Wow.
Yes. Yeah. So can you imagine when we got into laparoscopic and diagnostic imaging, and all the different colors we use for malignant tumor identification and all that? Poor guy, green lights. Nope, not a thing.
Oh.
Yeah. So vascular was not going to be his jam, by the way. Yeah.
Oh.
So great guy. Shout out to him. He's kicking it in ortho.
Hey,
he
you know
made
what?
it through.
You make do and you overcome, right?
Yes,
and they also do
absolutely.
make really cool glasses for people who are colorblind.
They really
can
do.
help you see colors because my nephew has them, and my son, we also just found out last year, is also colorblind. And I didn't know. I just kind of guessed. I'm like, it's like, wait, what color? What are you wearing? Like what? And so you just kind of wonder. And then I'm like, oh, here you are, 13 years old, and I didn't know. I'm sorry. So yeah, sometimes it just, oops, you kind of make it through, right? So I feel sorry for your student, but I'm glad you found out for him. So
hey, that's okay. Who knew sterile indicators was going to be the key? So we got through seal, we got through indicator, right? The next one is date, because we have expiration dates. Anybody who has gone through the torture of inventory day in an OR, right? Yeah. Anytime I'm working, please just stick me in a case, because the idea of having to spend an entire shift doing inventory was never, ever.
Tell me when inventory is going to be. I'll call in. I shouldn't say that. Just kidding. I won't. But I would literally like to take the day off. Oh, my
absolutely. Don't I have PTO at some point, right?
Exactly, somewhere.
But seriously, we have to make sure that it isn't expired, right? Nobody wants to drink expired milk, and you darn sure don't want to use any expired supplies inside of your patient. So that's a lot of paperwork. So we have to make sure that our students check the dates, which gets, by the way, really, really hard to do in the education world, because a lot of the supplies that we use have been donated, right? Yeah. So we honestly would have students, and we reuse things over and over again.
So the seal is broken, and it's not sterile, and
absolutely.
It's expired.
And it's expired, and half the stuff is probably older than my students, So we'd have my poor little millennial babies are over here going, I'm opening a catheter that expired before they were ever even born. So that's always fun. But by God, they're going to find the date.
They're going to find the expiration date.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's strikethrough. So seal, indicator, date, strikethrough. And trying to get a student to understand the concept of strikethrough is super hard some days, because strikethrough isn't necessarily checking the supply itself. So strikethrough is checking what you are opening the supply on. So in the lab, and
okay. Yeah. Because I'm like, what is this term? I don't know that I know this term. Okay. Got it.
Well, hey, here we go. My favorite thing, teachable moment.
Exactly.
Right? Absolutely. So, for example, when we've talked about sterile processing so much, right? You and I are both super passionate about that. But so one of the reasons why we have a drying time in downstairs in sterile processing, once it's gone through these very hot sterilizers, or we use steam in order to sterilize these pans, they have to cool down, right? Because when they cool down, if we take hot instruments and we open them in a very cold room, what happens? What forms?
Moisture.
Yeah, moisture, right? Condensation. And that condensation pulls bacteria, dust, particles from the air, and it pulls it right down into these instruments that you've sterilized. And now all of that dust particles, all of those skin cells, everything floating in the air have now contaminated your instruments. So we have to cool them down so that doesn't happen. Well, the same thing when we do turnover in a room. When we do turnover and we take those bactericide wipes and those disinfectant wipes, and we've sprayed and cleaned everything, all the Mayo stands, the back tables, everything in the room. Well, if that hasn't dried, if it's still wet, and we go and we open instrumentation onto it, we open towels, we open, a back table, we open anything onto that, especially our gowns, right? So those blue, it's not a towel, right? But the wraps that our gowns are on, those things are permeable. When we go
and they're just going to suck all that up. Yeah,
exactly. When we go to open that on a Mayo stand that's still wet, that's going to take that moisture that's on that Mayo stand, and it's going to wick right into our sterile gown. And that's what strikethrough is. So you have to have a student, and my fun thing is that my favorite thing, and we make them verbalize every single step. Because I am not a mind reader, although my husband, and B, my 4 kids swear that I am. But I'm not a mind reader. So we seriously make our students say it out loud. Seal, indicator, date, strike through. And in the beginning, in our first, what we call our baby lab, because bless their hearts, they really are. They don't have a clue, right? And so
we were all there once. So we gotta get there. Yeah.
There are days where I feel like I still am in baby lab.
Yeah.
But we make them verbalize seal, indicator, date, strike through. And we ask them, what are you checking? Like when you say seal and you're staring at me, you're not checking a seal. Like my lips are not sealed, but let's go, right?
Yes. Find a seal. Come on.
Yeah, find a seal. Indicator, I'm not indicating jack. What are you trying to find, right? So my favorite thing is they're looking at the package and they're going strike through. And I was like, and you don't get the points for that.
Yeah.
Right? So I want them, when they say strike through, their hand is literally touching whatever surface it is that they are going to open X, Y, and Z on.
So they know the surface is fully dry.
They know that the surface is fully dry. So it's important because you have to teach them these things. They have to be able to verbalize it and they have to tell you the why. And it's all of those steps. Can you imagine? I mean, that's how many steps just for opening a supply. Mm-hmm. And that's one of 2,512 things that we have to teach our students. But it's so critical.
Yeah, it's foundational. It really is.
Absolutely. So, so those are the things that we have to do. Everything you learned in kindergarten. And I swear we go back to those kindergarten techniques from day one in the OR. But it's those things that make you really good as an educator. It's those things that make our students really great in the operating room. And our favorite thing to do is to watch them take these things and they go out to the clinical sites and you'll see those preceptors that were our graduates. And you'll watch these babies go out to the clinical site and immediately they'll go seal. And you have you'll have my graduates and they're like, Chris isn't here. You don't have to say it out loud anymore.
But we know you're thinking it. And so we
know, right? Yeah, absolutely.
So you have ingrained it in them and they are ready to succeed, which is good.
Yeah. But that's the goal. Like I expect perfection.
Yeah,
are we humans? We're going to make a mistake? Sure. But if you don't train them from day one to know the why we do what we do, then they're never going to recognize when a mistake's made and they're never going to critically think their way through it. And that's the goal is like, I need you to know what a mistake is because you're going to make it.
Yeah, exactly. And to be able to critically think through it, I think is so, so important. I have an indicator story too that just happened to me just this last week.
Oh, sure.
I know, right? But so at my last facility, we were fastidious about we had to make sure we could see that indicator. We were checking our blue wraps for holes. We were checking our filters for holes. We almost had maybe a small level of PTSD just because, really, really big orthopedic service. Even one small hole, one missed indicator could really set us off track and derail us for the whole day. And we had several issues with our sterile processing department to the point, and this is not a dig at our sterile processing department. Our volume far exceeded what we had staffing in sterile processing to really accommodate. And so that glitch of time as it came up to speed, there was just some problems.
It snowballs.
It snowballs, right?
Yeah.
But in that time frame, it really teaches you really quickly how important checking your indicators, checking your blue wraps, checking those filters. You got to check the filters in the caskets. Please, dear God, I've seen holes in those filters. And that being said, it became very ingrained in me just because I had seen so many filters that had holes or indicators that hadn't turned, various things. Anyway, fast forward to last week, different facility. And I don't understand, or I don't know the thinking at the place I am. I work PRN. I'm not there all the time and I've not been there. I've been there about a year, but it's just common practice. We take the lid off and I'll check the filters in the casket or whatever. And then they just take the tray and go put it on their back table. And I'm like, hey,
what?
Where's the filter? Hold on. And they have had such a phenomenal sterile processing department, and they've been able to keep up that they've just, I think, never run into an issue where there wasn't an indicator or, whatever, but it leads to bad habits, right? And you aren't checking the indicator. You don't know that it's sterile. And so I'm like, every time a tray is getting taken, I'm like, oh, hold up. Do you see the indicator? Let's look before we stick this on the back table. Well, anyway, last week, we had an issue with the camera. It didn't have everything it needed. And so I had to go get another camera. I opened the camera to the surgical tech, and good on her. We open it up and she starts looking for her indicator, and we can't find one. And that's the first time in a year at me working there that I've ever opened a tray, and we could not find an indicator. And she's looking and I don't want to touch it because as soon as I touch it, we're done. And
it's gone.
It's done. And so I don't see it. She doesn't see it. So finally she hands it to me. And then as soon as she hands it to me, it was underneath the little blue spongy stuff that holds the camera.
Yeah.
You know, the indicator,
cushion.
the cushion thing. I don't know what that's called. Spongy cushion thing is what I call it.
Cushion thing works.
Right?
Yeah.
The indicator for somehow had been put in the tray before the cushion thing had been put in. So the indicator was upside down underneath the blue cushion thing. So how would you have seen that, right?
Yeah. It helps no one.
It helps nobody. So obviously an indicator was there, but by the time we found it, we'd already contaminated it because once again, if you're in doubt, you get rid of it, right?
Absolutely.
And we had one more camera, so we could go get that and get this one run for the next case. And all was well, but it was a good example of, hey, this is why we look for indicators, because if there isn't one, it doesn't matter what the outside wrap says. We're still not using this tray, or we're still not using this instrument. It doesn't happen very often at the facility where I'm at, but it can happen anywhere. And so you do have to be vigilant. You do have to look for those things every time you open something.
Well, you just say there's a process for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's never personal. And I think sometimes 100%. We take everything so personally in the operating room. And I honestly, I think the underlying reason is because we care, right? Like I take my job personally because I care about that patient. I want to do well. But what we have to realize is that you can't take the human out. And please don't trust me that much. Like, you know, I
am human. And I am as distractible as a rabid squirrel sometimes. So like, please don't assume I'm perfect because I know I'm not. And that's why we have all of the checks and balances that we have for sure.
Right. And and that's part of what Huddle does for us, right? Is it lets us know about things that might be happening before we ever get ourselves in that situation to begin with. Because how many times at Huddle have you been told, hey, this washer's broken, this sterilizer's not happening, or, oh, by the way, this vendor just brought in X, Y, and Z trays
so we're going
that we
to
didn't
case
know were
number
going to
3
happen.
Because case number 1 doesn't have any other trays for a total joint. And so we're going to move that one later and rearrange and all the things that we have to do.
And here's part of the problem. That CST knew that case 1 was going to go. So instead of attending Huddle, that CST went in to go ahead and open number 1.
Yeah.
And there starts the chain that starts the script of the day.
Yeah. And then the communication failures and people don't know. And then people are stressed and angry and pissed off and whatever else. And
And now what are we not thinking about? We're not thinking about the patient.
Flustered. Oh, no, not at all. Absolutely. Yeah.
And so there's why Huddle is so incredibly important, right?
For sure.
But I wonder, it takes us, and this is what you said, right? It forces us to pause. And there are so many reasons why that pause matters. And the first one, I think, is it gets us, like I said in the beginning, right? Like out of our own selves. That's part of what I teach in our classroom. You have to have that one moment that makes you stop being Chris Blevins' mom, Chris Blevins' wife, Chris Blevins' hot mess, and becomes Chris Blevins' patient advocate. For me, that was always the moment I did my morning scrub. So I,
take a deep breath and focus.
Like I had a meditation that I would do, like a gratitude prayer as I was, do to each fingernail.
That's a really
and
good
scrub.
practice. Yeah.
That was my thing. I wonder what's yours? Like, do you have that moment where you stop being Melanie freaking Perry and become, that perioperative nurse that you are? I always wonder what that is for each person.
So for me, it's actually my drive to work. Don't talk to me in the morning, please, dear God. I don't want the radio on. I don't want music. I certainly don't want the radio talking to me. I barely want my husband to speak to me in the morning. But I am incredibly internally focused in the morning. But when I drive to work, like all of that those gears shift. And it's a slow wake up process for sure. Or it's a 3.5 minute wake up process when I go warp speed to get to work because I'm late. But the same holds true. It is the changing gears. I'm leaving home. I'm not Melanie the mom. I'm not Melanie the wife or the crazy chicken lady or whatever else. I am Melanie, the OR nurse, who is going to take care of patients. And one of the things that I always try to focus on when I am thinking about my day and I'm thinking about the patients that I'm going to see is that every one of the patients that I see, I'm going to see maybe 10 patients, just myself with the different cases I do. Maybe I'll see 6, maybe I'll see 15. I don't know what I'm assigned to. But each of those patients is only going to see me one time. And so every time that I see a patient, I'm going to interact with them one time. And that interaction needs to be the most important interaction with them because they're not just patient number 2 or patient number 3. They're the patient. And I need to treat all of them like I would be treating you or my mother or my husband or my child or anybody else that I hate to say that we would see as more important, right? But as soon as it's our family member, suddenly we get different. But every patient that is there is somebody's family member, and every patient there is not just cattle that we're pushing through the stall and moving through. They are an individual person. And so as I drive to work, I think about those things, think about getting my brain and gear and mind right to be able to put that first time interaction greeting hat on every time I see a patient, because for them, that's the only time they're going to see me. And it makes a world of difference if you treat them like an individual and not just the next person on your list.
Yeah. And it's such a different perspective for a surgical technologist. And that's something you have to ingrain in your students. And it's almost, there's plus and minuses, right? Because we do not interact with the patient's family. And 99% of the time, we don't get to interact with the patient either. Mm-mm. So
they're not going to remember you if you do interact with them.
Right. Thank you for said, right? They're not going to remember me anyway, even if I do help them onto the bed or hold their hand or do whatever, that's a gift sometimes, especially when I know that it's a very complicated procedure, because that gift of distance allows me to focus on the anatomy, to focus on the procedure, to not let my emotions sometimes get in the way. But also, I think that sometimes that can be a hindrance because you get so focused on the procedure that it can harden some surgical technologists to forget that there's a person. And you have to keep that in mind, that there's a family out there waiting all the time. And there are some people in my profession, I'm not going to call out any names today. Chris has a smile on her face. But there are some that are horrible at that. And it does not do our profession any good.
But we've all seen them, Yeah. And I think it's par for the course. Just
absolutely
doing it time and time again, and you forget the humanity side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's important, but at the end of the day, you have to care for that person, whether they knew you were in there or not. But what do you how do you sleep at night? How do you hold your head up? And did you do the very best for that patient, whether they're going to say thank you or not, or whether they even have any idea that you were elbow deep in their abdomen?
100%.
Yeah. At the end of the day, did you do seal, indicator, date, strikethrough?
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Did you look for it? And did you do the right thing? So, and that's the goal.
Yeah. I love that.
So obviously we figure out why we do what we do, right? And how important it is. But I think the first step, and the reason why we wanted to do season 13 on the huddle, is because that is the one moment at the beginning of a shift where the entire team gets to focus on the patient and what our goal is for that day. What do you think are some of the things that you've seen at the different facilities that you've gotten to work at that are common to a morning huddle?
So I've worked at a couple different places, and I was in charge of the morning meeting, as we called it, when I was in Texas. And the funny thing is, I had started working in the operating room in 2011, and it was just part of our culture. Like, overhead page at 6:30, morning meeting at the board, and everybody would just come to the OR board, right? Which is awfully convenient, because if you're going to be talking about the schedule and you're standing in front of the board, it's really easy to discuss that schedule when you can see it.
Especially when it's complicated.
But there was and that was literally just, this is what we do. It was just the culture. But why? Why do we do it every day? Why do we have this morning meeting when we're supposed to be rolling back and starting at 7 and we're calling a meeting at 6:30, and we would have people, I don't have time for that. I've got to go get my room ready and X, Y, and Z. And I think there are ways to navigate that well. But I also think it is incredibly important to understand why are we doing this in the first place? And what are we including, so that people can see that, yes, this meeting does have value. And yes, you do need to be here because this does pertain to you. And if we need to accommodate, now this is obviously me speaking. I'm not writing the checks and telling people when they can clock in. But if we need to accommodate what time you get to work so that we can actually put patient safety first and have our safety huddle in the morning with everybody present, then that's something we should do. But your morning meeting, I think you mentioned it earlier, it's not the time to really talk about, the traffic we saw on I-65 or 20 or 40 or wherever else we were. Or if you're in Texas on 35, holy smokes. That's not the place for your morning huddle. That's not the information in your morning huddle, but it's supposed to be quick. A really quick, let's get together. It's almost like our timeout, right? Let's pause before we start our day and let's look at what is really important. Do we have any name alerts? Are there two or three patients who are all patient Smith? Well, let's really pay attention and make sure that we know which patient is where, right? Do we have any latex allergies? Generally, name alerts and latex allergies are almost always included, because the latex allergies affects us from the word go when we're setting up our rooms if we're not in a latex-free facility. I am not, by the way. So knowing those latex allergies is really important. Also, are there any, like you mentioned, are there any instrument issues? Did trays not arrive for a case and we're having to rearrange the schedule? Did we have a sterilizer go down? Is there something going on in SPD? Is there something going on in radiology and we're down a C-arm, so we maybe can't do certain cases in a certain order? All of those things with equipment, with instruments, or with supplies. Like how common was it during the pandemic? We don't have that today. We don't have that today. We don't have that today. We're using this instead. And so having a quick bit of information so you can arm yourself, because as good as me, once you're in the room and you're running and going, you're thinking to what you're used to having, what I know I'm supposed to get. And if I haven't been told already, okay, you're not going to have that, you're going to need to go get this.
Oh, your brain defaults.
I know, right? And so, but I've been told, they told me, I remember now, okay, I'm not panicked, I'm good, or maybe I've gone and grabbed some ahead of time, or maybe I forgot anyway and somebody had to tell me again. But as a general rule, it prepares you to maybe cut down on some of that stress and some of that tension and hecticness, I guess. Yeah.
And staffing, I think, is a huge one.
Absolutely. Yeah. If we're going to be running late, are we going to, I don't even know, was the call team late last night and they're coming in late, so we're starting with different people, or all of the different things that might feed into staffing. And as a side note, going to think back to our SPD or radiology or other departments, you can have them at your morning meeting. It's certainly advisable to include especially sterile processing. Let them have a voice in your daily huddle. They're the ones that know what's going on with the instruments. Or what about supply chain? They're the ones who are going to be telling you what you have and what you don't have. So always good.
Collaboration.
Imagine that. Multidisciplinary team. I think that's the buzzword, right?
What? It sounds like a podcast.
Right? Yeah. So, but that's the point. And the more we say, include this, and this, suddenly you're like, holy smokes, this is going to be so long. My room's going to start late. No. This is everybody's standing. We're not sitting down drinking our coffee. We're all standing up. Because if you're standing up, it does imply naturally a sense of urgency. I am engaged. I'm awake. I'm listening. I'm getting the information I need. Yes, it's rapid fire, but I need it to be. I just give me the details. Yeah. And perhaps there was an issue yesterday that needs to get brought up. Okay. We're not going to excessively vent or prolongingly, if that's a word, complain.
It is today.
Yeah. It's a word today. But we can bring that up. because that's an opportunity. You have leadership's ear, right? You can pass that on, and then they are then responsible to deal with it. And then hopefully in the next huddle or on your communication board or something, follow up with how that issue may have been dealt with. So maybe not a time to rant and rave and complain, not a time to talk about your sports teams or whatever, but it is a time to bring up pertinent information. And everybody really should feel empowered to speak. If there's an issue, it's not just the whole team standing there listening to me, the manager, just vomit all of this information. What about our team leaders? What about our service line coordinators? What about our lead surgical tech or whoever we have that's giving us this information? Let's get it out there. Let's pass it on. And then one thing that I did, just because I consistently had people who I could not get to come to the morning meeting no matter what I did, or we also had later shifts. And so people would come in later and they would miss the morning meeting. I always typed up my notes from the morning meeting and I stuck them on the board. And so if you did not get the morning meeting in the morning meeting, all of that information was printed out every day in bullet format where you could just glance at it, read it, see it. And that way you had access to the same information.
I think that's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. We had something similar where we had a weekly roundup is what ours were called. And everybody had to initial it.
That's also excellent. Yes.
There's accountability.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right. So yeah, I think accountability, efficiency, being succinct. And that's what we do in the OR anyway, right? Yeah. We're rapid fire. It's go and go.
Yeah.
But what a great idea to collaborate. What a great idea to have everybody involved and really make it something that is meaningful as opposed to a gripe fest. So that way, you know, we're better as an OR, we're faster, and we can really help our patients and make the day go smoother. And then maybe we'll have less gripe sessions.
Exactly, right. And that all goes back to communication, right? And how important it is that we all communicate with each other so that we can adequately take care of our patients and that we can have an efficient and a productive OR. And in the AORN guideline for team communication, they actually said that a lot of evidence demonstrates that communication breakdowns in the perioperative setting are a factor in events that adversely affect patients. And 70% of adverse events in the surgical environment are caused by breakdowns in communication among healthcare providers.
Good God.
Now that is including your timeout, your debriefing, all of the other forms of communication and surgical safety checklists. But our morning huddle is one of those ways that we communicate, one of those ways that we pass on that patient safety information and ensure that our days run smoothly. And then as we move through, as we go about our cases and we remember all of this information for opening our sterile supplies and making sure that we are following the proper steps, the proper protocol, and checking for that seal, that indicator.
The date and the strikethrough.
I just had a complete blank, but I'm so glad you saved me. As we look for the seal, the indicator, the date, and the strikethrough. And then we have to communicate all that back if there's a problem. So it all ties in together and it all closes in nicely to see why we need that team communication to make our ORs run smoothly. So we've talked about all of it, Chris, and I think the fundamentals of communication, how we make sure that information is passed on, but then also how important it is to learn why. Why are we doing what we're doing? It's not just enough to say this is how we do it. We have to teach people why. And I think you did an excellent job explaining the why behind the technique for opening sterile supplies. And it's a fantastic foundation for anybody who just maybe doesn't understand the process or has been struggling with it.
Well, and I think it starts from day one. We as educators are responsible not just for teaching them the why, but also for teaching them that they have to talk. Not everybody is comfortable communicating.
Yep. Find your voice.
Yeah, find your voice. And I think we're going to talk a lot about finding your voice and why it's important to communicate the right things during this season of First Case.
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to it.
I am too, but that is going to do it for today's interview. On behalf of Chris, myself, and our entire team, thanks for listening to this season 13 premiere of First Case.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.